Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm so excited you're here with me today. Before we dive into today's episode, I want you to take a moment and think about something. Have you ever been in a conversation where you knew exactly what you wanted to say in English, but when the words came out of your mouth, they just sounded wrong? Maybe too formal, maybe choppy, or maybe just not the way a native speaker would say it? I completely understand that feeling because I've been there too. I remember when I was learning to communicate more naturally in different situations, there was this one moment that really stuck with me. I was at a coffee shop, and I wanted to ask for a simple change to my order. In my head, I had prepared this perfect sentence, but when I spoke to the barista, it came out so robotic and stiff. The barista understood me perfectly, but I walked away feeling frustrated because I knew I didn't sound natural at all. That moment made me realize something important about how we approach speaking English. The truth is, most of us have been taught to focus on the wrong things when it comes to sounding natural in English. We worry about perfect grammar, we stress about using impressive vocabulary, and we get caught up in trying to sound like we're reading from a textbook. But here's what I've discovered after years of helping people improve their English speaking skills, and this is something that will completely change how you think about natural conversation. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 simple secrets that will transform the way you speak English. These aren't complicated grammar rules or difficult vocabulary lists. These are practical insights that you can start using immediately, and I promise you, they will make a dramatic difference in how natural you sound when you speak. But before we get to those secrets, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to hit that like button if you've ever felt frustrated with how you sound when speaking English. And if you're serious about improving your natural speaking ability, make sure you subscribe to our channel because we're building an amazing community of English learners who support each other on this journey. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever listened to someone speaking English and thought, wow, they sound so natural, so effortless? It's like the words just flow out of them without any struggle at all. Meanwhile, you might feel like every sentence is a battle, like you're fighting to get the words out in the right order. The fascinating thing is, the difference between sounding robotic and sounding natural isn't what most people think it is. You see, when we listen to natural English speakers, we often assume they're using complex grammar or sophisticated vocabulary. We think they must know some advanced rules that we haven't learned yet. But the reality is completely different. Natural speakers succeed because they focus on connection and flow rather than perfection and complexity. Think about it this way. When you speak in your native language, do you think about grammar rules? Do you carefully choose the most impressive words? Of course not. You focus on sharing your ideas, expressing your feelings, and connecting with the person you're talking to. The words flow naturally because you're not fighting against yourself. You're not constantly judging every word that comes out of your mouth. This is the first big shift in thinking that I want you to make today. Natural English speaking isn't about demonstrating how much you know about the language. It's about communication, connection, and expressing yourself clearly. When you make this mental shift, something magical happens. Your brain stops working against you and starts working with you. Here's something that might surprise you. Native English speakers make mistakes all the time. They use simple words, they repeat themselves, they pause to think, and sometimes they even restart sentences halfway through. But we don't notice these things because they're focused on communication, not perfection. Their confidence comes from knowing that their message is getting across, not from speaking flawlessly. I want you to imagine for a moment what it would feel like to speak English with that same confidence. Picture yourself in a conversation where you're not worried about making mistakes, where you're not translating in your head, where the words just come naturally because you're focused on sharing your thoughts and connecting with the other person. This transformation is absolutely possible for you, and it's probably easier than you think. The 3 secrets I'm going to share with you today have helped thousands of English learners make this exact transformation. I've seen people go from sounding stiff and uncomfortable to sounding relaxed and natural in just a few weeks of applying these principles. The first secret has to do with how you think about English in your mind. Most learners approach English like it's a complicated puzzle that needs to be solved perfectly every time they speak. But natural speakers treat English like a simple tool for sharing ideas. When you change your mental approach to English, your speaking automatically becomes more natural. The second secret involves understanding what native speakers actually do when they talk. Spoiler alert, it's much simpler than you probably think. They use patterns and rhythms that you can easily learn and copy, but most English learners never pay attention to these patterns because they're too focused on individual words and grammar rules. The third secret is about practice, but not the kind of practice you might expect. It's not about drilling grammar exercises or memorizing vocabulary lists. It's about a specific type of practice that trains your mouth and your brain to work together naturally, the same way native speakers do. These three secrets work together to create a complete transformation in how you sound when you speak English. But more importantly, they change how you feel when you speak English. Instead of feeling nervous and self-conscious, you'll feel confident and natural. Instead of fighting to get words out, you'll find that ideas flow smoothly from your thoughts to your speech. So are you ready to discover these three secrets that will change everything about how you approach natural English conversation? Are you ready to finally sound as good as you know you can? Let's dive in and start this amazing transformation together. Before we dive deeper into these life-changing secrets, I need your help to keep this community growing. If you're ready to transform your English speaking from robotic to natural, hit that like button right now to show me you're committed to this journey. Your like tells me that this content is helping you, and it helps other English learners discover these powerful techniques. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell because I share new strategies every week that will accelerate your progress toward natural, confident English speaking. Now here's something I really want to know from you. In the comments below, tell me about a time when you felt frustrated with how robotic or formal you sounded in English. Maybe it was during a work presentation, a casual conversation, or even just ordering food at a restaurant. Share your story because I read every single comment, and your experience might be exactly what another community member needs to hear to realize they're not alone in this struggle. Plus, I often create future episodes based on the challenges you share, so your comment could inspire content that helps thousands of other English learners just like you. Let me share with you the most important secret about speaking English naturally, and this might completely change how you think about the entire process. When I work with English learners around the world, I notice that almost everyone has the same basic belief about natural English speaking. They believe that natural speakers have access to some kind of special knowledge, some advanced rules or techniques that make them sound effortless and smooth. But here's the truth that might shock you. Natural English speakers succeed not because they know more rules, but because they've learned to ignore most of the rules. They focus on something completely different than what most English learners spend their time worrying about. Instead of trying to speak perfectly, they focus on speaking effectively. Instead of trying to impress people with their vocabulary, they focus on sharing their ideas clearly. Think about this for a moment. When you have a conversation in your native language with a friend, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about what you want to say, how you feel, what story you want to share, or what question you want to ask. You're not thinking about sentence structure. You're not worried about whether you're using the past perfect tense correctly. You're not trying to remember if a word is masculine or feminine. You're simply communicating. This is exactly what natural English speakers do, and it's exactly what you need to learn to do in English. But I know what you're probably thinking right now. You might be saying, Julia, that sounds great in theory, but English isn't my native language. I need to think about these things because I don't have the same automatic knowledge that native speakers have. And you're absolutely right. You do need to learn English vocabulary and patterns. But here's where most people make a huge mistake. They think they need to master everything before they can start focusing on natural communication. They believe they need to know all the grammar rules, memorize thousands of words, and understand every exception before they can start sounding natural. But that's backwards. Natural communication is actually the fastest way to improve your English skills. When you focus on sharing your ideas and connecting with people, your brain starts to absorb the language patterns naturally. You stop fighting against the language and start working with it. Let me give you a perfect example of what I mean. Yesterday, I was listening to a conversation between two native English speakers at a restaurant. One person said, I was going to go to the store, but then I was like, nah, I don't really need anything right now. Now, if you analyze this sentence from a traditional learning perspective, you might think it's full of problems. Gonna isn't proper English. I was like, isn't correct grammar. But you know what? It sounded completely natural, and the other person understood perfectly. This is what I want you to understand. Native speakers use shortcuts, informal words, and simple expressions all the time. They repeat words when they're thinking. They start sentences and then change direction halfway through. They use the same simple words over and over again instead of trying to show off with fancy vocabulary. But here's the key difference between a native speaker doing this and a learner trying to copy them. The native speaker isn't worried about making mistakes. They're confident that their message will get across. They trust that the other person will understand them. This confidence is what makes their speech sound natural, not their perfect grammar or impressive vocabulary. I want you to imagine two different people having the same conversation. The first person carefully chooses each word, double-checks their grammar in their head, and speaks slowly to make sure everything is correct. The second person focuses on sharing their ideas, uses simple words they know well, and speaks with confidence even if they make small mistakes. Which person do you think sounds more natural? Which person do you think the listener enjoys talking to more? Obviously, it's the second person. The first person might be more technically correct, but they sound robotic and uncomfortable. The second person creates a real human connection. This is the natural speaker mindset that I want you to adopt. Instead of treating English like a test where every answer has to be perfect, start treating it like a tool for connecting with people. Instead of worrying about impressing others with your English skills, focus on sharing your thoughts and ideas in a way that people can understand and relate to. Now, you might be wondering how to develop this mindset when you've been trained to focus on accuracy and perfection for so long. The good news is that this shift in thinking can happen faster than you might expect. It starts with changing what you pay attention to when you listen to English speakers. Instead of listening for perfect grammar and fancy vocabulary, start listening for connection and flow. Notice how native speakers use simple words to express complex ideas. Pay attention to how they repeat themselves, how they pause to think, how they use the same phrases over and over again. You'll start to realize that natural English is much simpler than you thought. Here's something I want you to try right now. Think about a story you want to tell or an opinion you want to share. Now, instead of trying to translate it perfectly from your native language, think about the main idea you want to communicate. What's the most important thing you want the other person to understand? Focus on that central message, and then use the simplest English words you know to express it. Don't worry about using the most sophisticated vocabulary. Don't stress about perfect tenses. Just focus on getting your main idea across clearly. You'll be amazed at how much more natural you sound when you approach English this way. You'll also notice that conversations become more enjoyable because you're actually connecting with people instead of performing for them. This mindset shift is the foundation of natural English speaking. Once you understand that English is a communication tool rather than an academic subject, everything else becomes easier. Your confidence grows, your fluency improves, and most importantly, people enjoy talking with you because you're focused on them rather than on your own performance. Let me tell you about Maria, because her story perfectly illustrates what I've been talking about. Maria contacted me about 6 months ago, and she was incredibly frustrated with her English speaking ability. She worked as a marketing professional for a large international company in Mexico City, and her job required her to participate in English meetings with colleagues from all over the world several times a week. Maria had been studying English for years. She had taken courses, worked with private tutors, and spent countless hours reading grammar books and doing exercises. Her English knowledge was actually quite impressive. She could write detailed emails, she understood complex presentations, and she knew thousands of vocabulary words. But when it came to speaking in meetings, she felt like she was failing completely. She told me that every time she wanted to contribute to a discussion, she would have this perfect response in her mind, but by the time she translated it and tried to say it out loud, the conversation had already moved on. She felt like she was always one step behind everyone else. Even worse, when she did manage to speak, she could hear how stiff and formal she sounded compared to her colleagues who spoke English as their second language, but seemed so much more natural and confident. Maria was convinced that she needed to study more grammar, learn more vocabulary, or maybe take another course to fix this problem. She thought there was some missing piece of knowledge that would suddenly make her sound natural. But when we talked, I realized that Maria's problem wasn't about knowledge at all. She actually knew plenty of English. Her problem was with her approach. Here's what Maria was doing wrong, and I bet many of you do exactly the same thing. Every time she wanted to say something in English, she would first think of what she wanted to say in Spanish. Then she would try to translate that thought word by word into English. Then she would check her translation in her mind to make sure it was grammatically correct. Finally, she would try to say it out loud, but by that time, she had lost all natural flow and confidence. This process was making her English sound robotic and unnatural. Plus, it was so slow that she could rarely participate in fast-moving conversations. Even when she did speak, She was so focused on not making mistakes that she couldn't focus on actually communicating her ideas effectively. So I suggested something that seemed almost too simple to work. I told Maria to stop trying to translate from Spanish and instead start thinking directly in simple English phrases. I explained that she should focus on getting her main idea across using basic words she knew well, rather than trying to express every detail perfectly. At first, Maria was skeptical. She thought this approach would make her sound less professional or less intelligent. She was worried that using simple words would make her colleagues think she didn't know much English. But I convinced her to try it for just 1 week in her meetings. The first thing I taught Maria was to identify the core message she wanted to communicate before she started speaking. Instead of thinking, I have this complex idea that I need to express perfectly, she learned to think, what's the main point I want these people to understand? Once she had that main point clear in her mind, she would express it using the simplest English words and phrases she knew confidently. For example, instead of trying to say something like, I believe we should reconsider our strategic approach to this particular market segment, because the demographic analysis indicates some concerning trends, Maria learned to say something like, I think we need to look at this market again. The numbers show some problems. She could always add more details if people wanted to hear them, but she started with the clear, simple core message. The second thing I taught Maria was to stop worrying about perfect pronunciation and instead focus on speaking with confidence and clarity. I explained that her colleagues cared much more about understanding her ideas than about hearing perfect English pronunciation. When she stopped being self-conscious about her accent and started focusing on clear communication, her speech naturally became more flowing and natural. Within just 2 weeks, Maria started noticing changes. She found herself able to jump into conversations more quickly because she wasn't spending so much time translating and checking her English in her head. She was actually contributing ideas to meetings instead of just listening. More importantly, she was starting to enjoy these English conversations instead of dreading them. But the real breakthrough came after about a month. Maria told me that she was in a particularly important meeting with senior executives from different countries. There was a heated discussion about a marketing strategy, and Maria had a strong opinion about the topic. In the past, she would have stayed silent because she couldn't figure out how to express her complex thoughts perfectly in English. But this time, she focused on her main message and jumped right in. She said something like, I don't think this will work in our market. Our customers are different. They want something more personal. It wasn't fancy language, but it was clear and confident. Not only did everyone understand her immediately, but her comment actually changed the direction of the entire meeting. The executives started asking her more questions and really listening to her perspective. That was the moment when Maria realized that natural English speaking wasn't about impressing people with sophisticated language, it was about communicating effectively and confidently. She started to understand that her colleagues respected her ideas, not her grammar perfection. Over the next 2 months, Maria continued applying this approach. She practiced thinking in simple English phrases instead of translating from Spanish. She focused on clear communication instead of perfect sentences. She spoke with confidence even when she wasn't sure about every word choice. The transformation was remarkable. After 3 months, Maria's colleagues started commenting on how much more confident and natural she sounded in meetings. Some people even asked her if she had been taking speaking lessons because they noticed such a big improvement. But Maria hadn't taken any lessons. She had simply changed her approach from trying to speak perfectly to focusing on communicating clearly. Maria also told me something interesting. She said that once she stopped worrying so much about making mistakes, she actually started making fewer mistakes. When she was relaxed and focused on her message instead of on her performance, the English words seemed to flow more naturally. She wasn't fighting against herself anymore. Today, Maria is one of the most active participants in her international meetings. She contributes ideas confidently, she asks questions when she doesn't understand something, and she's even started leading some presentations. Her English hasn't become perfect, but it has become natural and effective, which is exactly what matters in real communication. Now, I want to share something with you that might surprise you, and it's probably the opposite of what you've been taught about speaking English well. Most English learners believe that to sound impressive and fluent, they need to use sophisticated vocabulary, complex expressions, and fancy words that show off their knowledge of the language. But here's the truth that will change everything for you. Native English speakers use simple words most of the time. I know this might be hard to believe, especially if you've spent years building up your vocabulary with advanced word lists and trying to memorize impressive expressions. But think about it for a moment. When you talk to friends in your native language, do you use the most complicated words you know? Do you try to impress them with fancy vocabulary? Of course not. You use simple, comfortable words that express your ideas clearly and naturally. The same thing happens with native English speakers. They choose words that feel natural and comfortable, not words that sound impressive. They say, I think, instead of I believe. They say good instead of excellent. They say help instead of assist. They say start instead of commence. These simple words flow easily in conversation because they're the words that feel most natural to say. Let me give you some real examples of what I mean. Yesterday, I was listening to two native English speakers having a conversation about their weekend plans. One person said, I think I'm going to go to the park if the weather's good. Maybe I'll bring a book or something. Now this person could have said, I believe I shall visit the recreational area provided the meteorological conditions are favorable. Perhaps I will transport some reading material. But can you imagine how strange and unnatural that would sound? The first version uses simple words like think, gonna, good, and maybe. These words are comfortable and easy to say. They flow naturally in conversation. The second version uses more sophisticated vocabulary, but it sounds like someone reading from a textbook, not like a real person having a natural conversation. Here's what happens when English learners try to use impressive vocabulary in conversation. They choose words that they've memorized from lists, but these words don't feel natural to them yet. When they speak, they have to think carefully about each word choice, which makes their speech slow and choppy. Even worse, they often choose words that are technically correct but don't quite fit the natural flow of conversation. For example, many learners say, I am pleased to meet you, instead of nice to meet you. Both expressions are correct, but nice to meet you is what native speakers actually say in casual situations. The more formal expression might be appropriate in very formal business settings, but in most conversations it sounds stiff and unnatural. The same thing happens with words like purchase instead of buy, obtain instead of get, sufficient instead of enough, or require instead of need. All of these formal words are correct English, but native speakers usually choose the simpler versions in everyday conversation. I want you to understand something important here. I'm not saying that advanced vocabulary is bad or that you should never learn sophisticated words. Advanced vocabulary is useful for specific situations, like academic writing, formal presentations, or professional documents. But for natural conversation, simple words that you know well will always serve you better than impressive words that make you hesitate or sound unnatural. Think about it this way. When you use words that feel comfortable and familiar to you, several good things happen. First, you speak more fluently because you don't have to search for the right word. Second, you sound more confident because you're not worried about using the word incorrectly. Third, you connect better with people because you sound like a real person having a conversation, not like someone giving a formal speech. Let me share a practical example of how this works. Imagine you want to express that you really enjoyed a movie. Many English learners might say something like, the film was extraordinarily captivating and intellectually stimulating. But a native speaker would probably say something like, the movie was really good, I loved it, or that movie was amazing. I couldn't stop watching. Notice how the native speaker version uses simple words like really, good, loved, and amazing. These words are much easier to say naturally, and they actually express enthusiasm more effectively than the formal version. When someone says, I loved it with genuine emotion in their voice, it sounds much more convincing than someone carefully pronouncing extraordinarily captivating. Here's a practical exercise I want you to try. Take any complex sentence you might say in English and see if you can express the same idea using the simplest words possible. For example, instead of I encountered numerous difficulties, try I had a lot of problems. Instead of the weather conditions are unfavorable, try the weather is bad. Instead of I would like to request your assistance, try can you help me? You'll probably notice that the simple versions are not only easier to say, but they're also clearer and more direct. Native speakers prefer clear, direct communication over impressive vocabulary. They want to understand your message easily, not work hard to figure out what you're trying to say. Another important point about simple words is that they give you more flexibility in conversation. When you use words you know really well, you can focus on other aspects of natural speaking, like your tone of voice, your rhythm, and your connection with the listener. You're not using all your mental energy trying to remember how to use advanced vocabulary correctly. I've noticed that English learners who embrace simple vocabulary actually improve faster than those who focus on learning more and more complex words. Why? Because they practice speaking more often. When you're not worried about using impressive words, you're more willing to start conversations, ask questions, and participate in discussions. This extra practice with simple, comfortable vocabulary builds your confidence and fluency much more effectively than memorizing advanced word lists. The key is to choose words that feel natural and comfortable to you, words that you can say without hesitation or worry. These are usually the simpler, more common words that native speakers use all the time. When you build your speaking confidence with these familiar words, you create a strong foundation for natural English conversation. I want to tell you about Ahmed because his transformation shows exactly how powerful simple changes can be when it comes to sounding natural in English. Ahmed worked for a multinational company in Dubai, and his job involved constant communication with international clients and colleagues from Europe, America, and Asia. He had excellent English skills on paper. His emails were professional and clear, his presentations were well-structured, and he could handle complex business discussions without any problem. But Ahmed had one major frustration that was holding him back professionally. Every time he spoke English in meetings or phone calls, he felt like he sounded like a robot reading from a script. His colleagues were always polite and professional with him, but he noticed that they seemed to connect more easily with other non-native English speakers who somehow sounded more relaxed and approachable than he did. Ahmed told me that he would listen to recordings of his own presentations and cringe at how formal and stiff he sounded. He said it was like listening to a news anchor delivering a report rather than a person having a conversation. He knew his English was technically correct, but something was missing that made other people sound natural and friendly, while he sounded distant and robotic. The interesting thing about Ahmed's situation was that he had learned English primarily through formal business courses and academic programs. All of his training had focused on proper pronunciation, correct sentence structure, and professional vocabulary. He had been taught to avoid contractions because they were considered too informal for business communication. He always said I am instead of I'm, you are instead of you're, and it is instead of it's. When Ahmed and I first talked, he was convinced that his problem was with his accent or his pronunciation. He thought maybe he needed to work on sounding more American or British. But as I listened to him speak, I realized that his pronunciation was actually quite good. His real problem was that he sounded like he was giving a formal presentation, even when he was just having a casual conversation. Here's what was happening. Ahmed's formal training had taught him to speak English, the way you might write a business report. Every sentence was complete and proper. Every word was fully pronounced. There were no shortcuts, no casual expressions, and definitely no contractions. This approach works perfectly for formal presentations or written documents, but it makes everyday conversation sound unnatural and robotic. So I suggested something that seemed almost too simple to make a difference. I told Ahmed to start using contractions in his daily English conversations. Instead of saying, I am going to the meeting, he should say, I'm going to the meeting. Instead of, you are right about that, he should say, you're right about that. Instead of, it is a good idea, he should say, it's a good idea. Ahmed was initially resistant to this suggestion. He had been taught for years that contractions were informal and unprofessional. He worried that using contractions would make him sound less educated or less serious in business settings. But I explained to him that native English speakers use contractions constantly in conversation, even in professional environments. The key is knowing when to use them and when to avoid them. I told Ahmed that contractions are like the oil that makes conversation flow smoothly. When you say I am, there's a slight pause between the two words that creates a formal, choppy rhythm. But when you say I'm, the words flow together naturally, creating the smooth rhythm that characterizes natural English conversation. Ahmed decided to try this approach, but he started slowly. For the first week, he practiced using contractions only in low-pressure situations, like ordering coffee or talking to the taxi driver. He found that these simple changes immediately made his speech sound more relaxed and conversational. The coffee shop staff started being more friendly with him, and taxi drivers began initiating conversations instead of just answering his questions politely. Encouraged by these small successes, Ahmed began using contractions in slightly more formal situations. He started using them in casual conversations with colleagues, in informal meetings, and during friendly phone calls. He was amazed at how much more natural and approachable he sounded with such a simple change. The real test came during a major client presentation that Ahmed had been preparing for weeks. This was a crucial meeting with potential clients from Germany and the United States, and Ahmed knew that building rapport with them was just as important as delivering good technical information. Instead of his usual formal approach, Ahmed decided to use contractions naturally throughout his presentation. The difference was remarkable. Instead of sounding like he was reading from a script, Ahmed sounded like he was having a conversation with the clients. When he said things like, "We're confident this solution will work for you," instead of, "We are confident this solution will work for you," his speech had a natural flow that made the entire presentation feel more engaging and personal. But the real breakthrough happened during the question and answer session. One of the American clients asked a challenging question about implementation timelines. In the past, Ahmed might have responded with something formal like, "That is an excellent question. We have analyzed this situation carefully." Instead, he responded naturally with, "That's a great question. We've looked at this pretty carefully." The difference was subtle but powerful. The contraction and casual word choice made Ahmed sound confident and approachable rather than stiff and defensive. The clients began asking follow-up questions and engaging in a real dialogue rather than just listening to formal answers. After the meeting, Ahmed received feedback that surprised him. The clients commented not only on the technical quality of his presentation, but also on how comfortable and confident he seemed. One client specifically mentioned that Ahmed seemed very approachable and easy to work with. These were exactly the kinds of comments that Ahmed had been hoping to receive for years. Over the next few months, Ahmed continued to incorporate contractions into his daily English conversations. He learned to use them naturally in casual business discussions, while still avoiding them in very formal situations like written reports or official presentations. He found the perfect balance between professional communication and natural conversation. The transformation went beyond just sounding more natural. Ahmed told me that using contractions actually made speaking English feel easier and less stressful. When he wasn't focused on pronouncing every single word perfectly and formally, he could put more energy into connecting with people and expressing his ideas clearly. His confidence grew because he wasn't constantly worried about sounding too formal or robotic. 6 months later, Ahmed was promoted to a position that required even more international communication. His manager specifically mentioned Ahmed's improved communication skills and his ability to build rapport with international colleagues and clients. Ahmed realized that this simple change in how he spoke English had actually advanced his career in ways he never expected. Today, Ahmed is one of the most popular presenters in his company for international meetings. Colleagues often ask him to lead calls with foreign clients because he has developed a reputation for being both professional and approachable. All of this started with the simple decision to use contractions naturally in his English conversations. Here's something that most English learners never think about, but it's one of the most important secrets to sounding natural when you speak. English isn't just about words and sentences. English has a rhythm, almost like music, that creates the flow and melody you hear when native speakers talk. When you learn to recognize and copy this rhythm, your English will immediately sound more natural and flowing. Even if you're not pronouncing every single word perfectly, think about your favorite song for a moment. What makes that song enjoyable to listen to? It's not just the individual notes. It's the rhythm, the beat, the way some notes are emphasized while others flow quickly in the background. The same thing happens with English conversation. Native speakers naturally emphasize certain words while speaking quickly through others, creating a musical pattern that makes their speech sound smooth and effortless. Let me give you a simple example of what I mean. Listen to how a native speaker might say this sentence. "I think I'm going to go to the store later." They don't say each word with equal emphasis. Instead, they stress certain important words. "I think I'm going to go to the store later." The stressed words carry the main meaning, while the other words flow quickly and smoothly between them. Now compare that to how many English learners say the same sentence. They often give each word equal weight and emphasis. "I think I am going to go to the store later." Every word is pronounced carefully and completely, but the result sounds robotic and unnatural because it lacks the natural rhythm that makes English flow. This rhythm isn't random or accidental. Native speakers unconsciously stress the words that carry the most important information in each sentence. These are usually content words like nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. The words they speak quickly through are usually function words like articles, prepositions, auxiliary verbs, and pronouns. These connecting words are necessary for the sentence structure, but they don't carry the main meaning. Here's what's fascinating about this natural rhythm. When you focus too much on pronouncing every single word perfectly, you actually lose this natural flow. You end up emphasizing words that shouldn't be emphasized, and speaking too slowly through words that should be stressed. This is why some English learners can have excellent pronunciation for individual words, but still sound unnatural in conversation. I want you to imagine English conversation like a river flowing over rocks. The stressed words are like the rocks that the water flows around and emphasizes. The unstressed words are like the smooth water flowing quickly between the rocks. If you try to make every part of the river into a rock, you lose the natural flow that makes it beautiful and effective. The amazing thing about this rhythm is that it actually makes English easier to understand, not harder. When native speakers use natural stress patterns, they're highlighting the most important information for the listener. The stressed words tell you what the sentence is really about, while the unstressed words provide the connections and details. For example, if someone says, "I need to buy some groceries before the store closes," you immediately understand the key information. Need, buy, groceries, before, store, closes. Even if you miss some of the unstressed words in between, you can still understand the main message because the rhythm has emphasized the important parts. This is why focusing on rhythm is actually more important than trying to pronounce every individual sound perfectly. When you get the rhythm right, people can understand you clearly even if your pronunciation isn't perfect. But when you get the rhythm wrong, people might struggle to understand you even if every individual word is pronounced correctly. Now, you might be wondering how to develop this natural rhythm in your own English speaking. The good news is that it's much easier than you might think, and it doesn't require studying complicated rules or memorizing stress patterns. The secret is to focus on the meaning of what you're saying rather than the individual sounds of each word. When you focus on communicating your message clearly, your brain naturally wants to emphasize the words that carry the most important information. If you're telling someone about a problem you had at work, you'll naturally want to stress words like problem, work, and whatever specific details are most important to your story. The connecting words will naturally become less emphasized because they're not carrying the main meaning. This is exactly what native speakers do, but they do it unconsciously. They don't think about which words to stress and which words to say quickly. They just focus on sharing their ideas clearly, and the natural rhythm emerges automatically from their desire to communicate effectively. Let me share a practical way to start developing this natural rhythm. When you're speaking English, try to identify the 3 or 4 most important words in each sentence. These are the words that carry your main message. Allow yourself to emphasize these words naturally while letting the other words flow more quickly and smoothly. For instance, if you want to say, "I'm really excited about my vacation next week," the most important words are probably really excited, vacation, and next week. Let these words carry more emphasis and energy while allowing words like I'm, about, and my to flow quickly and smoothly. You'll probably notice that when you do this, your speech immediately starts to sound more natural and engaging. People will find it easier to follow your ideas because you're highlighting the most important information for them. You'll also find that speaking becomes less tiring because you're not putting equal energy into every single word. Another way to develop natural rhythm is to listen to English conversations and pay attention to the musical quality of the speech rather than focusing on individual words. Try to hear the ups and downs, the fast parts and the slow parts, the emphasized words and the flowing connections. You don't need to analyze this technically. Just let your ear absorb the natural patterns. When you start paying attention to rhythm instead of just words, you'll discover that natural English has a beautiful musical quality that makes it enjoyable to listen to and speak. This rhythm is one of the key elements that separates natural-sounding English from textbook English. Once you begin incorporating natural rhythm into your own speech, you'll find that people respond to you differently because you sound more engaging, confident, and natural. Now I want to share with you a secret that can instantly make your English sound more natural and conversational. There are certain phrases that native English speakers use over and over again in everyday conversation. These aren't complicated expressions or advanced vocabulary. They're simple connecting phrases that help conversations flow smoothly and make speakers sound more confident and natural. You've probably heard these phrases thousands of times when listening to English speakers, but you might not have realized how powerful they are for creating natural-sounding speech. Phrases like, "You know what I mean," "That makes sense," "I see what you're saying," "To be honest," "Actually," and "basically" appear in almost every casual English conversation. These phrases serve as bridges that connect ideas and give speakers time to organize their thoughts. Let me explain why these connecting phrases are so important. When native speakers are having a conversation, they're not just delivering prepared speeches. They're thinking, processing, and responding in real time. Sometimes they need a moment to consider what they want to say next. Sometimes they want to show that they're actively listening to the other person. Sometimes they want to soften a statement or make it sound less direct. These connecting phrases serve all of these purposes naturally. When someone says, "You know what I mean," at the end of an explanation, they're inviting the listener to connect with their idea and confirm understanding. When someone says, "That makes sense," after hearing something, they're showing active engagement with the conversation. When someone says "actually" before making a point, they're smoothly introducing a new perspective or correction. The beautiful thing about these phrases is that they make any speaker sound more natural and confident, even when discussing complex or challenging topics. Let me give you some examples of how this works in real conversation. Imagine someone is explaining a work problem. Instead of saying, "The project deadline is too short. We need more time to complete the work properly," they might say, "So basically, the project deadline is too short. You know what I mean? We need more time to complete the work properly. And to be honest, I think we should talk to the manager about it." Notice how the connecting phrases transform the communication. "So basically" introduces the main point smoothly. "You know what I mean?" invites the listener to connect with the concern. "To be honest" makes the final suggestion sound more personal and genuine rather than demanding. Here's another example. Instead of saying, "I disagree with your opinion, I think we should try a different approach," someone might say, "I see what you're saying, but actually, I think we should try a different approach. What do you think about that?" The phrase, "I see what you're saying," shows respect for the other person's perspective before introducing a different viewpoint. "Actually" softens the disagreement and makes it sound less confrontational. "What do you think about that?" turns the statement into a collaborative question rather than a direct challenge. These connecting phrases work so well because they mirror the natural patterns of human thinking and social interaction. When we're processing information or considering different perspectives, we don't think in perfect, complete sentences. We think in fragments, we pause, we reconsider, and we connect ideas gradually. These phrases help spoken English reflect these natural thought processes. Many English learners avoid using these phrases because they think they're unnecessary or too informal. They prefer to speak in complete, direct sentences because that's what they've been taught in formal language courses. But this approach often makes their speech sound rigid and unnatural, like they're reading from a textbook rather than having a real conversation. The truth is that these connecting phrases are essential for natural English conversation. They're not filler words or signs of poor language skills. They're tools that skilled communicators use to create smooth, engaging, and natural-sounding speech. Even highly educated native speakers use these phrases constantly in both casual and professional conversations. Let me share some of the most useful connecting phrases that you can start using immediately. "You know" is incredibly common and versatile. You can use it to check understanding, to make a statement less direct, or to create a sense of shared knowledge with your listener. For example, "It's really important to practice every day, you know," or "You know, I was thinking about what you said." "I mean" is another extremely useful phrase that helps clarify or expand on what you've just said. "The weather has been crazy lately. I mean, it was sunny yesterday and now it's raining." Or, "I really like this restaurant. I mean, the food is amazing and the service is great too." "So basically" is perfect for introducing summaries or main points. "So basically, we need to finish the report by Friday." Or, "So basically, what I'm trying to say is that we should be more careful." "To be honest" or "honestly" makes your statement sound more personal and genuine. "To be honest, I'm not sure if that's the best idea." Or, "Honestly, I think you did a great job on that presentation." "Actually" is incredibly versatile and can introduce corrections, new information, or different perspectives. "Actually, I think the meeting is at 3, not 2. Or, "Actually, that's a really interesting point." The phrase "that makes sense" is perfect for showing that you understand and agree with someone. It's much more natural than saying "I understand" or "I agree." You can also use variations like "That's true" or "Right, exactly." "I see what you're saying" shows that you're actively listening and considering the other person's perspective. It's especially useful when you want to acknowledge someone's point before offering a different viewpoint. Here's the key to using these phrases effectively. Don't try to memorize them and insert them artificially into your speech. Instead, listen to how native speakers use them naturally in conversation. Pay attention to the rhythm and flow they create. Then gradually start incorporating the ones that feel most comfortable and natural to you. Start with 1 or 2 phrases that appeal to you and practice using them in low-pressure situations. As they become more comfortable, you can add others to your natural speaking repertoire. Remember, the goal isn't to use as many of these phrases as possible, but to use them naturally to create smooth, confident conversation flow. When you begin incorporating these connecting phrases into your English speaking, you'll immediately notice that your conversations feel more natural and relaxed. You'll sound more like you're having a real conversation rather than delivering a formal presentation. More importantly, these phrases will give you confidence because they provide natural pauses where you can organize your thoughts and maintain the flow of conversation. I want to share Sophie's story with you because it offers a unique perspective that most English learners never get to hear. Sophie was born and raised in London, so English is her native language, but her work in international business gave her an incredible opportunity to observe how non-native speakers develop natural English speaking skills. What she discovered might completely change how you think about your own English learning journey. Sophie worked for a large consulting firm in London that employed people from all over the world. Her team included colleagues from Germany, France, Italy, Spain, India, China, Brazil, and many other countries. All of these colleagues had learned English as a second language, but Sophie noticed something fascinating. Some of them sounded incredibly natural and confident when they spoke, while others, despite having excellent technical English skills, sounded stiff and uncomfortable. At first, Sophie assumed that the natural-sounding colleagues simply had better English skills or had studied longer. But as she worked with these people day after day, she realized that wasn't true at all. Some of the colleagues who sounded most natural actually made more technical mistakes than those who sounded robotic and formal. This observation sparked Sophie's curiosity about what really makes someone sound natural in English conversation. Sophie started paying closer attention to her colleagues during meetings, lunch conversations, and casual interactions. She began to notice patterns that had nothing to do with vocabulary size or perfect pronunciation. The colleagues who sounded most natural and connected best with everyone, including the native English speakers, had developed certain attitudes and approaches that the more formal speakers hadn't adopted. The first thing Sophie noticed was that the natural-sounding colleagues used simple, direct phrases instead of trying to impress people with complex vocabulary. For example, during team meetings, one of her German colleagues named Klaus would say things like, "I think we should try this approach," or "That's a good point, but what about this problem?" Meanwhile, another colleague would say something like, "I believe we should contemplate implementing this particular methodology," or "Your observation is astute, however, we must consider the potential ramifications." Both colleagues were expressing similar ideas, but Klaus sounded like he was having a normal conversation, while the other colleague sounded like he was reading from a business textbook. Sophie realized that Klaus had learned to prioritize clear communication over impressive language, and this made him much more engaging to talk with. The second pattern Sophie observed was even more interesting. The colleagues who sounded most natural weren't afraid to pause when they needed to think. Instead of filling every moment with words or struggling to speak without any hesitation, they would take comfortable pauses to organize their thoughts. They might say something like, "Well, let me think about that for a second," or "That's an interesting question, give me a moment." These pauses actually made them sound more confident and thoughtful rather than less fluent. Sophie noticed that when people tried to speak without any pauses, they often ended up using filler sounds like and constantly, or they would speak so quickly that their words became jumbled and hard to understand. The third thing Sophie observed was that the most natural-sounding colleagues smiled while they spoke and maintained a relaxed, friendly demeanor. This might sound obvious, but Sophie realized that many of her more formal colleagues seemed tense and serious whenever they spoke English, as if speaking the language was a stressful test they had to pass rather than a tool for connecting with people. One of her Brazilian colleagues, Marina, was particularly good at this. Even when Marina was discussing serious work topics or complex problems, she maintained a warm, approachable energy that made people want to engage with her. Sophie noticed that Marina would often start difficult conversations with phrases like, "So here's what I'm thinking," or "Let me share an idea with you," rather than launching into formal problem statements. Sophie also observed that the natural-sounding colleagues weren't afraid to show their personality in English. They would make jokes, share personal stories, and express their opinions with genuine enthusiasm. The more formal colleagues seemed to think that speaking English required them to become serious and professional all the time, which made their conversations feel distant and impersonal. For example, during casual lunch conversations, Marina would tell funny stories about her weekend or share her excitement about a new restaurant she had discovered. Her English wasn't perfect, and she occasionally used Portuguese words when she couldn't think of the English equivalent, but people loved talking with her because her personality came through so clearly. This observation led Sophie to a crucial insight about natural English speaking. She realized that the colleagues who sounded most natural had learned to be themselves in English. They hadn't created a separate, formal English-speaking persona. Instead, they had found ways to express their natural personality, humor, and warmth through English conversation. Sophie began to understand that natural speech is much more about attitude and approach than about technical perfection. The colleagues who focused on connection and communication always sounded more natural than those who focused on avoiding mistakes and demonstrating their language skills. She also noticed that the natural-sounding colleagues had developed the ability to recover gracefully from mistakes. When they couldn't think of a word, or when they realized they had said something incorrectly, they would simply smile, laugh it off, and try again. They might say something like, "Sorry, what I meant to say was," or "Let me put that differently," without getting embarrassed or frustrated. This relaxed attitude toward mistakes actually made them more confident speakers overall. They weren't constantly worried about making errors, so they could focus their mental energy on communicating their ideas effectively and connecting with their listeners. Perhaps most importantly, Sophie observed that the natural-sounding colleagues had learned to trust that their message would get across even if their English wasn't perfect. They focused on sharing their ideas, asking questions, and engaging with others, rather than on monitoring their own performance. This trust in the communication process allowed them to speak with genuine confidence and naturalness. Sophie's observations taught her something valuable about language learning that most English courses never address. Technical skill is important, but attitude and approach are often more crucial for natural communication. The colleagues who sounded most natural had developed a relaxed, confident, and genuine approach to English conversation that made people want to engage with them. Today, Sophie uses these insights to help international colleagues who join her team. Instead of focusing on technical corrections, she encourages them to relax, be themselves, and focus on connecting with others through English. She's seen remarkable transformations in people who simply needed permission to stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be natural. Here's something that might surprise you about natural English speaking, and it goes against what most people believe about fluency. Many English learners think that fluent speakers talk continuously without any pauses, that they have an endless stream of words flowing smoothly without any breaks or hesitation. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Natural English speakers actually pause frequently during conversation, and these pauses are one of the secrets that make their speech sound confident, thoughtful, and engaging. I know this might be hard to believe if you've been trying to speak English without any pauses because you think that's what fluency means. Many learners feel like they have to fill every moment of silence with words, even if those words are just and sounds. They're afraid that if they pause, people will think they don't know what to say or that their English isn't good enough. But let me tell you what really happens when native speakers have conversations. They pause to think. They pause to breathe. They pause for emphasis. They pause to make sure the other person is following their ideas. These pauses aren't signs of weakness or lack of fluency. They're tools that skilled communicators use to make their speech more effective and natural. Think about the most engaging speakers, whether they're speaking English or any other language. Do they rush through their words without taking any breaks? Of course not. They speak at a comfortable pace, they pause when they need to think, and they use silence strategically to create impact and clarity. The same thing happens in everyday English conversation. When someone is telling you a story, they might pause before revealing an important detail to build suspense. When someone is explaining a complex idea, they might pause after each main point to make sure you're understanding. When someone is considering your question, they might take a moment to think before responding thoughtfully. These pauses actually make speech sound more confident rather than less fluent. When you pause before speaking, you give your mind time to organize your thoughts naturally. This means that when you do speak, your words come out more smoothly and clearly because you're not trying to think and talk at the same time. Let me give you a practical example of what I mean. Imagine someone asks you a challenging question about your opinion on a current topic. You have two options. You can immediately start talking while you're still figuring out what you want to say, which might sound like, Well, I think, it's kind of complicated because there are different ways to look at it. And I guess my opinion is that, or you can take a brief pause to organize your thoughts and then respond with something like, "That's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment." I think there are several important factors to consider here. Which response sounds more confident and thoughtful? Obviously, it's the second one. The pause allows you to approach the question with clarity and intention, rather than fumbling through your thoughts out loud. Here's what's fascinating about pausing in English conversation. When you're comfortable with silence, it actually makes other people more comfortable too. Rushing to fill every moment with words often makes conversations feel anxious and pressured. But when you're relaxed about taking pauses when you need them, it creates a more natural rhythm that allows everyone to think, process, and respond thoughtfully. Many English learners are afraid to pause because they think native speakers will judge them or think their English is poor. But the opposite is true. Native speakers respect thoughtful pauses because they show that you're considering your words carefully, rather than just saying whatever comes to mind first. I want you to think about this differently. Instead of seeing pauses as empty spaces that need to be filled, start seeing them as valuable tools for better communication. A well-timed pause can emphasize an important point, show respect for a difficult question, or simply give you the mental space you need to express yourself clearly. Here's a simple technique you can start using immediately. When someone asks you a question or when you want to make an important point, take a breath before you start speaking. This doesn't have to be a long, dramatic pause, just a natural breath that gives your mind a moment to organize your thoughts. You might say something like, "That's an interesting question," or "Let me think about that," to acknowledge the pause and show that you're taking the conversation seriously. These phrases also buy you a little extra thinking time while showing respect for the other person and the topic. Another way to use pauses effectively is to break your longer statements into smaller chunks. Instead of trying to express a complex idea in one long, continuous sentence, break it into several shorter statements with brief pauses between them. This makes your speech easier to follow and gives you natural opportunities to organize your next thought. For example, instead of saying, "I think this project is really important because it addresses several key issues that we've been discussing for months, and it could have a significant impact on our future success if we implement it correctly and get everyone on board with the changes we need to make." You could say, "I think this project is really important. It addresses several key issues that we've been discussing for months. And if we implement it correctly, it could have a significant impact on our future success." Notice how the pauses between sentences make the statement clearer and more impactful. Each pause gives the listener time to absorb one main idea before moving on to the next one. Here's something else that might surprise you. Native English speakers often use pauses strategically to create emphasis or drama in their storytelling. They might pause right before revealing an important detail or right after making a strong point to let it sink in. These pauses actually make their communication more engaging and memorable. The key to using pauses naturally is to stop being afraid of silence. Silence isn't your enemy in English conversation. It's actually one of your most powerful tools for clear, confident communication. When you're comfortable with pausing when you need to think, you'll find that your speech becomes smoother and more natural because you're not constantly struggling to keep words coming out while you're still figuring out what you want to say. Practice this in low-pressure situations first. When you're ordering food, asking for directions, or having casual conversations, give yourself permission to pause when you need a moment to think. You'll probably notice that people are perfectly comfortable with these natural pauses, and you'll start feeling more confident about taking the time you need to express yourself clearly. Remember, natural English speaking isn't about talking continuously without stopping. It's about communicating effectively, and sometimes the most effective thing you can do is pause, think, and then speak with intention and clarity. Now I want to give you a practical roadmap for developing natural English speaking skills through your everyday activities. The secret to sounding natural isn't found in textbooks or language labs. It's found in the real conversations you have during your daily routine. Every time you order coffee, ask for directions, or chat with a neighbor, you have an opportunity to practice natural English in a low-pressure environment where you can build confidence gradually. The beauty of practicing through daily situations is that the vocabulary is familiar and the interactions are predictable. When you order coffee, you know you'll need words like medium, large, milk, and sugar. When you ask for directions, you'll use phrases like, "Excuse me," "How do I get to?" and "Thank you." Because you already know what vocabulary you'll likely need, You can focus on speaking naturally rather than searching for words. Let me start with one of the most perfect practice opportunities: ordering food or drinks. This situation is ideal for several reasons. First, the interaction is brief and focused, so there's no pressure to maintain a long conversation. Second, the vocabulary is limited and predictable. Third, the person serving you wants to understand you quickly and help you, so they're naturally patient and supportive. Instead of just saying "coffee, please," like you're reading from a phrase book, try to make the interaction more natural and conversational. You might say something like, "Hi, could I get a medium coffee with milk, please?" Notice how "hi" creates a friendly opening. "Could I" sounds more natural than "can I?" And "please" at the end shows politeness. If you want to practice even more, you could add something like, "How's your day going?" Or, "This place smells amazing." The key is to approach these interactions as real conversations with real people, rather than language exercises. When the barista asks for "here" or "to go," don't just answer with the minimum words. Try responding naturally with something like, "To go, please. I'm heading to work." Or, "For here, thanks. I'm meeting a friend." These small additions make you sound more conversational and give you practice with natural speech patterns. Asking for directions is another excellent daily practice opportunity. Instead of just saying, "Where is the bank?" try making your request sound more natural and polite. You might say, "Excuse me, I'm looking for the nearest bank. Do you know where one is?" Or, "Hi, sorry to bother you, but could you help me find Main Street?" When someone gives you directions, don't just say "thank you" and walk away. Practice using those connecting phrases we talked about earlier. You might say, "Okay, so I go straight and then turn left at the traffic light, right?" Or, "Got it, thank you so much, that's really helpful." These responses show that you're actively listening and help you practice natural conversation flow. Shopping is another fantastic opportunity for natural speech practice. Instead of silently picking up items and paying, try engaging with the cashier or sales assistant. You might comment on the weather by saying, "Beautiful day today, isn't it?" Or ask a simple question like, "Do you know if this brand is any good?" These small interactions help you practice making natural conversation in comfortable, low-stakes situations. Small talk with neighbors, building staff, or people you see regularly is perfect for building conversational confidence. You don't need to have long, deep conversations. Even brief, friendly exchanges help you practice natural speech patterns. You might say, "Good morning, how's it going?" to someone in your building elevator, or "Nice weather we're having" to a neighbor you pass on the street. The important thing is to focus on sounding natural and friendly rather than grammatically perfect. If someone asks, "How are you?" don't just say, "Fine, thank you." Try responding more naturally with something like, "Pretty good, thanks. How about you?" Or, "Not bad, just heading to work. How's your day going?" Here's a crucial point about practicing through daily situations. Start with interactions where you feel comfortable and confident. If ordering coffee feels easy for you, practice making those conversations more natural and engaging. If asking for directions makes you nervous, start with easier interactions and gradually work up to more challenging ones. The goal is to build success upon success. Each positive interaction where you speak naturally and connect with someone builds your confidence for the next conversation. This confidence is what ultimately makes you sound natural, not perfect vocabulary or flawless pronunciation. Pay attention to how these daily conversations make you feel. When you have a natural, friendly exchange with someone, notice how good it feels to connect with another person through English. This positive feeling is what motivates you to continue practicing and improving. It's also what gives you the confident energy that makes natural speech possible. Here's something important to remember as you practice through daily situations. Don't try to practice everything at once. Pick one aspect of natural speech that you want to work on, like using contractions, pausing comfortably, or adding connecting phrases, and focus on that during your daily interactions for a week or two. For example, you might spend 1 week focusing on using contractions naturally. During all your daily conversations, pay attention to saying "I'm" instead of "I am," "you're" instead of "you are," and "it's" instead of "it is." Once contractions start feeling natural, you can focus on something else, like using connecting phrases or improving your conversation rhythm. The repetition of daily situations is incredibly valuable for developing natural speech habits. When you order coffee 5 days a week using natural, conversational language, those patterns become automatic. When you greet the same security guard every morning with friendly small talk, you develop confidence in casual conversation. This repetition in familiar contexts is exactly how children learn to speak naturally in their native language. They practice the same interactions over and over until the language patterns become automatic and effortless. You can use the same approach with English by turning your daily routine into natural speech practice opportunities. Remember that every person you interact with during your day is a potential conversation partner who can help you practice natural English. The cashier at the grocery store, the receptionist at your doctor's office, the person sitting next to you on public transportation, all of these people represent opportunities to practice real, natural communication in comfortable, low-pressure situations. The more you practice speaking naturally in these everyday situations, the more automatic these patterns become. Soon you'll find that natural speech habits transfer to more challenging situations like work meetings, social gatherings, or important conversations. The confidence and natural flow you develop through daily practice becomes the foundation for all your English communication. Let me tell you about Carlos, because his story shows how a simple 5-minute daily practice can completely transform someone's English-speaking confidence. Carlos worked as an accountant for an international firm in Buenos Aires, and like many professionals in his situation, he needed to use English regularly for video calls with colleagues in other countries and for presenting financial reports to international clients. Carlos had studied English for several years and had a solid understanding of vocabulary and sentence structure. He could read complex financial documents in English without any problem, and his written emails were clear and professional. But when it came to speaking, especially during important video calls or presentations, Carlos felt like he was fighting a constant battle with the language. He told me that every time he had to speak English at work, he would spend hours beforehand trying to prepare exactly what he wanted to say. He would write out his key points, practice pronunciation of difficult words, and rehearse his presentations multiple times. Despite all this preparation, when the actual conversation or meeting began, Carlos would freeze up and revert to very formal, stilted language that sounded nothing like natural conversation. Carlos was particularly frustrated because he could hear the difference between his English and the English spoken by colleagues from other countries who also weren't native speakers. They sounded relaxed and conversational, while he sounded like he was reading from a script. Even worse, Carlos noticed that people seemed to engage more easily with his colleagues who spoke more naturally, while conversations with him often felt forced and uncomfortable. The breakthrough for Carlos came when I suggested something that seemed almost too simple to work. Instead of spending hours preparing for work conversations, I told Carlos to spend just 5 minutes each day talking to himself in the mirror about his day. Not practicing presentations or rehearsing work topics, but simply talking naturally about whatever was on his mind, the same way he would chat with a friend. At first, Carlos was skeptical. He thought this exercise was too basic and couldn't possibly help with his professional English communication. But I explained that the goal wasn't to practice work vocabulary or business presentations. The goal was to develop a natural conversational flow that he could then apply to any English-speaking situation, including professional ones. Carlos started his mirror practice by simply describing what he had done that day. He would stand in front of his bathroom mirror each morning and talk for 5 minutes about his plans, his thoughts, or interesting things that had happened. The key rule I gave him was to focus on expressing his ideas clearly and smoothly, rather than worrying about perfect vocabulary or avoiding mistakes. In the beginning, Carlos found this exercise surprisingly difficult. He realized that he had become so accustomed to carefully planning every English sentence that speaking spontaneously felt uncomfortable and unnatural. He would start a sentence, stop to think about the correct way to say it, restart, and then get frustrated with himself for making the interaction feel so choppy and artificial. But I encouraged Carlos to push through this discomfort and focus on the main goal: natural expression of his thoughts. I told him that if he couldn't think of the perfect word, he should use a simpler word that he knew well. If he made a mistake, he should just continue talking rather than stopping to correct himself. The most important thing was to keep the conversation flowing naturally. After about a week of daily mirror practice, Carlos started to notice something interesting. The exercise was becoming easier and more natural. Instead of carefully constructing each sentence, he found himself simply talking, letting his thoughts flow naturally into English words. He was still making mistakes, but he wasn't stopping to worry about them, and somehow this made his speech sound much more fluent and confident. Carlos also discovered that talking to his mirror was helping him identify his own natural speaking patterns and preferences. He noticed that he naturally used certain phrases and expressions repeatedly, and instead of trying to vary his vocabulary constantly, he began to embrace these natural patterns as part of his personal speaking style. The real test came during a routine video call with colleagues from different countries. Carlos had been dreading these calls for months because he always felt so self-conscious about his English. But this time, instead of over-preparing and rehearsing, Carlos decided to approach the call the same way he approached his mirror conversations, focusing on expressing his ideas naturally rather than speaking perfectly. The difference was immediately noticeable, both to Carlos and to his colleagues. Instead of the formal, careful speech patterns he usually used, Carlos found himself speaking more conversationally and spontaneously. When someone asked him about a budget issue, instead of giving a prepared, formal response, he replied naturally with something like, "Yeah, that's actually something I've been thinking about too. Let me share what I found when I looked into it." Carlos told me that he could feel the energy of the conversation change. His colleagues seemed more engaged and started asking follow-up questions and having a real discussion rather than just listening to his formal reports. For the first time in months, Carlos actually enjoyed an English-speaking work meeting instead of just enduring it. Encouraged by this success, Carlos continued his daily mirror practice but started expanding it slightly. Sometimes he would practice explaining work concepts in simple conversational language. Other times he would practice telling stories about his weekend or sharing opinions about current events. The key was always the same: natural expression rather than perfect performance. Within a few weeks, Carlos noticed that his confidence in English conversations was growing rapidly. He started volunteering to lead more international calls at work because he was no longer afraid of speaking spontaneously in English. He began participating more actively in casual conversations with international colleagues, sharing jokes and personal stories rather than just sticking to formal work topics. The transformation wasn't about Carlos suddenly becoming perfect at English or eliminating all his mistakes. He still had an Argentine accent, he still occasionally searched for words, and he still made minor errors. But none of that mattered because he had developed the ability to speak naturally and confidently, focusing on communication rather than perfection. Carlos told me that the daily mirror practice had taught him something crucial about English speaking that all his formal training had missed. Natural communication isn't about demonstrating language skills, it's about connecting with people and sharing ideas effectively. Once he understood this distinction and developed the confidence to speak naturally, everything else became easier. Today, Carlos is known in his office as one of the most engaging speakers during international meetings. New employees often ask him for advice about improving their English communication skills. His response is always the same: spend 5 minutes each day talking naturally to yourself about whatever interests you, focusing on expression rather than perfection. One of the most powerful ways to develop natural English speaking skills is something you can do passively while going about your daily activities. I'm talking about listening to casual English conversations, podcasts, shows, or videos with the specific goal of absorbing natural speech patterns. This isn't the same as studying English or trying to memorize new vocabulary. Instead, it's about training your brain to recognize the natural rhythms, flows, and patterns that make English sound conversational and authentic. Most English learners make the mistake of listening to English content with the wrong focus. They concentrate on understanding every single word, or they try to memorize impressive phrases and expressions they hear. While vocabulary building is important, this approach misses something much more valuable for natural speaking development. The real magic happens when you listen for patterns rather than words, when you focus on how people connect their ideas rather than what specific words they choose. Think about how you learned the natural rhythms and patterns of your native language. You didn't study them in books or memorize rules about how to connect ideas smoothly. You absorbed these patterns unconsciously by listening to thousands of hours of natural conversation around you. Your brain learned to recognize what sounded natural and what sounded awkward, and this unconscious knowledge became the foundation for your own natural speaking ability. You can use this same process to develop natural English speaking patterns. When you listen to casual English conversations with the right approach, your brain starts to absorb the underlying structures that make English sound flowing and natural. You begin to internalize the rhythm of natural speech, the way ideas connect smoothly, and the comfortable patterns that native speakers use without thinking about them. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Instead of listening to a podcast and trying to understand every word or write down new vocabulary, listen for the flow of the conversation. Notice how speakers transition from one idea to another. Pay attention to the phrases they use to introduce new points, to agree or disagree, to ask for clarification, or to wrap up their thoughts. You might notice patterns like how speakers often say, "You know what I mean," when they want to check understanding, or how they use "actually" to introduce a different perspective, or how they say "so basically" to summarize their main point. You don't need to memorize these phrases or practice using them deliberately. Just let your brain absorb these natural connection patterns through repeated exposure. The key is to listen with relaxed attention rather than intense focus. You want to let the natural patterns wash over you and sink into your unconscious awareness rather than analyzing everything consciously. This is similar to how you might listen to music. You don't analyze every note and chord progression, but you absorb the overall rhythm and melody, and this influences your own sense of musical flow. Podcasts are particularly excellent for this type of passive learning because they feature natural, unscripted conversations between people who are comfortable with each other. The speech patterns you hear in podcasts are much more natural and authentic than what you typically find in language learning materials or formal educational content. Choose podcasts on topics that genuinely interest you rather than picking them solely for language learning purposes. When you're interested in the content, you naturally pay attention to the flow of ideas and the way speakers express themselves. This engaged but relaxed listening creates the perfect conditions for absorbing natural speech patterns. Television shows and movies can also be valuable, but I recommend focusing on content that features realistic, contemporary conversation, rather than historical dramas or fantasy shows with formal or unusual speech patterns. Sitcoms, talk shows, reality shows, and contemporary dramas often provide excellent examples of natural English conversation patterns. YouTube videos are another fantastic resource because you can find content on virtually any topic that interests you. Look for channels where people are having natural conversations, giving casual explanations, or sharing personal stories. Avoid overly scripted or formal content, and instead seek out creators who speak naturally and conversationally. Here's an important point about this passive listening approach. You don't need to understand every word or even every sentence to benefit from it. Your brain can absorb natural speech patterns even when you're not consciously understanding all the content. In fact, sometimes it's better not to focus too intensely on comprehension, because this allows you to pay more attention to the natural flow and rhythm of the speech. As you engage in this type of listening, you'll gradually notice that your own English speaking starts to develop a more natural flow. You might find yourself using connecting phrases that you don't remember consciously learning, or speaking with rhythm patterns that sound more conversational and less formal. This happens because your brain has absorbed these patterns through repeated exposure and begins applying them automatically in your own speech. One effective technique is to listen to the same content multiple times with different focuses. The first time, listen for general understanding and entertainment. The second time, pay attention to how speakers connect their ideas and transition between topics. The third time, notice the rhythm and flow of the conversation without worrying about specific words or meanings. You can also combine passive listening with other activities. Listen to English podcasts while exercising, during commutes, or while doing household tasks. This relaxed, multitasking approach often allows for better absorption of natural patterns because you're not putting pressure on yourself to learn or memorize anything specific. The beauty of this passive learning approach is that it works gradually and naturally, without the stress and effort of traditional studying. You're not trying to force yourself to speak differently or remember specific phrases. Instead, you're allowing your brain to naturally absorb the patterns that make English sound conversational and authentic. Over time, this exposure to natural speech patterns creates an internal sense of what sounds right in English conversation. You develop an intuitive feel for natural rhythm, appropriate connecting phrases, and conversational flow. This internal guide becomes invaluable when you're speaking, because it helps you choose words and phrases that sound natural rather than forced or formal. Remember that this is a gradual process that requires consistent exposure over time. You won't notice dramatic changes overnight, but after weeks and months of regular listening to natural English conversations, you'll find that your own speaking naturally becomes more flowing, confident, and authentic. The patterns you've absorbed unconsciously will begin appearing naturally in your own speech, creating the effortless flow that characterizes truly natural English conversation. I want to talk to you about something that can completely change your English learning journey, and it's probably different from what most people focus on when they're trying to improve their speaking skills. Instead of constantly worrying about your mistakes or focusing on how much you still need to learn, I want you to start celebrating the small wins you have every single day when you use English successfully. Most English learners have a habit of being incredibly hard on themselves. They focus on every mistake they make, every word they can't remember, and every moment when they feel like their English isn't good enough. But this approach actually works against natural speech development because it creates anxiety and self-consciousness that make speaking feel stressful rather than enjoyable. Let me give you a completely different way to think about your English progress. Every single time you successfully communicate something in English, no matter how simple it might seem, you're having a win. When you order your coffee and the barista understands exactly what you want, that's a communication success. When you ask for directions and the person gives you helpful information, that's effective English use. When you make small talk with a neighbor and they smile and respond warmly, you've created a positive connection through English. These might seem like tiny, insignificant interactions, but they're actually the building blocks of natural speaking confidence. Each successful communication experience, no matter how small, sends a positive message to your brain that you can use English effectively to connect with people and get things done. This positive reinforcement is what builds the relaxed confidence that makes natural speech possible. Here's what happens when you start recognizing and celebrating these small wins. First, your brain begins to associate English speaking with positive experiences rather than stress and anxiety. Instead of dreading English conversations, you start looking forward to them because you remember the good feelings from previous successful interactions. Second, you become more willing to take conversational risks and try new expressions because you're not constantly afraid of making mistakes. When you remember that you successfully connected with people using English before, you feel more confident about trying again in new situations. Third, you develop a more realistic and positive perspective on your own English abilities. Instead of focusing on everything you can't do yet, you start recognizing everything you can already do well. This shift in perspective is crucial for natural speech development because confidence is one of the key ingredients that makes speech sound natural and flowing. Let me share some examples of the kinds of small wins you should be celebrating. Did you successfully explain a problem to a customer service representative on the phone? That's a significant communication achievement that required you to describe a situation, express your needs, and understand the solution. Did you have a brief, friendly conversation with someone in an elevator or waiting in line? That demonstrates your ability to make natural small talk and connect with strangers. Did you watch a movie or TV show in English and understand most of what was happening without subtitles? That shows your listening comprehension is strong enough for natural speech patterns. Did you read an article or social media post in English and understand the main ideas without translating every word? That indicates you're developing natural language processing abilities. Even something as simple as successfully using a contraction in conversation, like saying "I'm going" instead of "I am going," is worth recognizing. Or noticing that you naturally pause to think during a conversation, instead of rushing to fill every silence with words. These small improvements in natural speech patterns are exactly the kind of progress that leads to overall transformation. The key is to shift your attention from what went wrong to what went right. Instead of thinking, "I made 3 mistakes during that conversation," try thinking, "I successfully shared my opinion and the other person understood my point completely." Instead of, "I couldn't remember the word I wanted," focus on, "I found another way to express my idea and got my message across clearly." This doesn't mean ignoring areas where you want to improve or pretending that mistakes don't matter. It means giving equal attention to your successes, so you develop a balanced and realistic view of your English abilities. When you recognize both your challenges and your achievements, you maintain motivation while building confidence. Here's a practical exercise you can start today. At the end of each day, think of at least one positive English interaction you had. Maybe you successfully explained something to a colleague, or maybe you understood a joke someone told, or maybe you felt comfortable using a new expression you had learned. Take a moment to acknowledge this success and let yourself feel good about it. You can even keep a simple journal of these positive English experiences. Write down one successful communication each day, no matter how small it might seem. Over time, you'll build up a record of consistent English successes that you can look back on whenever you're feeling discouraged or nervous about speaking. This practice of recognizing small wins creates a positive feedback loop that accelerates your progress. When you feel good about using English, you use it more often. When you use it more often, you get more practice and become more natural. When you become more natural, you have more successful interactions, which makes you feel even more positive about using English. I've seen this transformation happen with countless English learners. They start by celebrating small successes like ordering food without confusion or understanding a joke in a movie. These positive experiences build their confidence to try more challenging conversations. Soon they're volunteering to speak in meetings, making friends with English speakers, and feeling genuinely comfortable expressing themselves in English. The most important thing to understand is that confidence and natural speech reinforce each other. When you speak with confidence, you sound more natural, and when you sound more natural, you feel more confident. Celebrating small wins is one of the most effective ways to build this confidence because it's based on real, positive experiences rather than just positive thinking. Remember that every expert English speaker, including native speakers, started with simple communications and built their abilities through countless small successes. Your journey is no different. Each positive English interaction you have is proof that you're already capable of natural English communication, and each success makes the next one more likely. Start today by looking for opportunities to have small, successful English interactions. Order something at a restaurant, ask a question at a store, or make a brief comment to someone you encounter during your day. Focus on communicating successfully rather than speaking perfectly, and then take a moment to acknowledge your success. These small wins are the foundation of natural English-speaking confidence, and they're available to you every single day. Here's something that might completely change how you think about natural English speaking, and it's something that most English learners never consider. You already have a natural voice and personality when you speak in your native language, and that same authentic voice can and should come through when you speak English. The goal isn't to become a different person or to copy someone else's speaking style perfectly. The goal is to find your own natural voice in English. Think about how you sound when you're speaking comfortably in your native language with friends and family. You probably have certain expressions you use repeatedly, a particular sense of humor, specific topics that make you passionate, and a unique way of telling stories or explaining ideas. This is your natural speaking personality, and it's what makes conversations with you interesting and memorable for other people. Many English learners make the mistake of thinking they need to develop a completely different personality when they speak English. They try to sound like their English teacher, or like a character from a movie, or like the formal examples they've studied in textbooks. But this approach actually works against natural speech development because you're fighting against your own authentic communication style. When you try to be someone else in English, several problems arise. First, it requires enormous mental energy to maintain a fake personality while also managing a second language. This leaves you with less mental resources for natural flowing communication. Second, the artificial personality usually sounds stiff and uncomfortable because it doesn't match your natural communication patterns. Third, people can sense when someone isn't being authentic, which makes conversations feel forced and less engaging. I want you to imagine two different scenarios. In the first scenario, you meet someone who speaks English perfectly, with impressive vocabulary and flawless pronunciation, but they sound like they're giving a formal presentation even during casual conversation. In the second scenario, you meet someone whose English isn't perfect, but who speaks with genuine warmth, humor, and personality that clearly reflects who they really are as a person. Which person would you rather have a conversation with? Which person would you remember more positively? Obviously, it's the second person. Authentic personality always trumps technical perfection when it comes to engaging, memorable communication. People connect with genuine human expression, not with language performance. This is why finding your natural voice in English is so much more important than trying to eliminate your accent completely or using the most sophisticated vocabulary possible. Your natural voice includes your sense of humor, your way of showing interest in others, your style of telling stories, and your particular perspective on the world. These authentic elements of your personality are what make you interesting to talk with. Let me give you some practical ways to discover and develop your natural English voice. Start by paying attention to how you communicate in your native language. Do you tend to be direct or diplomatic when you express opinions? Do you use humor frequently, or are you more serious in your communication style? Do you ask lots of questions when you meet new people, or do you prefer to share information about yourself first? These natural communication preferences don't disappear when you switch to English. If you're naturally curious and ask lots of questions in your native language, you should do the same in English. If you're naturally funny and like to make people laugh, find ways to express your humor in English conversations. If you're naturally warm and caring in how you show interest in others, bring that same energy to your English interactions. The key is to focus on expressing your authentic thoughts and feelings rather than trying to say things the way you think an English speaker would say them. When you have a genuine reaction to something, express that reaction naturally in English rather than searching for the most impressive or formal way to respond. For example, if someone tells you exciting news and your natural reaction is enthusiasm and lots of questions, express that enthusiasm in English. Don't worry about whether you're using the most sophisticated vocabulary. Say something like, "That's amazing. How did that happen? You must be so excited," rather than trying to come up with a formal response like, "Congratulations on this significant achievement." Your natural voice also includes your personal interests and the topics that genuinely engage you. When you talk about things you're passionate about, your English automatically becomes more natural and flowing because you're focused on sharing ideas you care about rather than demonstrating language skills. If you love cooking, let that passion come through in your English conversations. Share stories about dishes you've tried or recipes you've discovered. If you're fascinated by technology, express that genuine interest when discussing new developments or gadgets. If you care deeply about your family, let that warmth and love show when you talk about the people who matter to you. Here's something important to understand about developing your natural English voice. It's not about copying native speakers or trying to sound like someone else. It's about finding English words and expressions that authentically represent your own thoughts, feelings, and personality. You might use slightly different vocabulary than a native speaker would use, or you might have a different rhythm or accent. But if you're expressing your authentic self, your communication will be engaging and memorable. I've worked with English learners who were convinced they needed to develop a more serious, professional personality in English for business situations. But when they started bringing their natural humor, curiosity, and warmth into professional conversations, they became much more successful at building relationships with international colleagues. Their authentic personality made them more approachable and trustworthy, which actually enhanced their professional effectiveness. The same thing happens in social situations. English learners who try to be perfect and formal often struggle to make friends or have engaging conversations. But when they start expressing their genuine personality, interests, and sense of humor in English, they naturally attract people who enjoy their company and want to spend time with them. Your natural voice in English might sound different from your native language voice because different languages have different rhythms and expressions. But the core of who you are as a communicator should remain consistent. Your kindness, your curiosity, your humor, your intelligence, and your unique perspective on life should all come through clearly when you speak English. Don't be afraid to make mistakes while you're developing your natural English voice. Authenticity is much more important than perfection. When you're genuinely expressing yourself, people are much more forgiving of small errors because they're engaged with your ideas and personality rather than analyzing your language performance. Start practicing this today by choosing one aspect of your natural personality that you want to express more clearly in English. Maybe it's your sense of humor, your curiosity about others, or your enthusiasm for your hobbies. Focus on bringing that authentic part of yourself into your English conversations, and notice how much more natural and engaging your communication becomes when you're being genuinely yourself. Now, I want to give you 3 specific actions you can take starting today that will immediately begin transforming how you sound when you speak English. These aren't complicated techniques that require hours of study or expensive courses. They're simple, practical steps that you can implement right now, and I promise you'll start noticing improvements within days if you commit to doing them consistently. The first action is something we talked about earlier, but I want you to commit to it right now. Starting tomorrow morning, spend just 5 minutes talking to yourself in your mirror about your day. This isn't about practicing presentations or rehearsing work conversations. This is about developing natural, spontaneous English expression by simply talking about whatever is on your mind. Here's exactly how to do this mirror practice effectively. Stand in front of your bathroom mirror each morning and talk for 5 minutes about anything that interests you. You might describe what you're planning to do that day, share your thoughts about something you watched on TV, or tell a story about something that happened to you recently. The key is to focus on natural expression rather than perfect language. Don't worry if you make mistakes or if you can't think of the perfect word. If you get stuck, just use simpler words that you know well. If you realize you said something incorrectly, don't stop to correct yourself. Just keep talking and focus on getting your ideas across naturally. Remember, the goal is to develop flowing, confident speech, not to demonstrate perfect English knowledge. This daily mirror practice works because it removes all the pressure and anxiety that comes with real conversations while giving you the opportunity to practice natural English expression. You can experiment with different ways of saying things, You can practice using contractions and connecting phrases, and you can develop your personal speaking rhythm without worrying about how others will react. The second action I want you to take is to choose one simple connecting phrase and commit to using it naturally in conversations for the next week. Pick something that feels comfortable and authentic to your personality. It might be, "You know what I mean? That makes sense. Actually, to be honest," or "so basically." Don't try to use multiple new phrases at once because that will make your speech sound forced and unnatural. Instead, focus on incorporating just one phrase naturally into your daily English conversations. Pay attention to how native speakers use this phrase in movies, podcasts, or conversations you overhear, and then practice using it in similar contexts. For example, if you choose "that makes sense," practice using it when someone explains something to you or when you want to show that you understand and agree with someone's point. If you choose "actually," practice using it when you want to introduce a different perspective or correct information gently. The key is to use the phrase in appropriate contexts, where it feels natural rather than forcing it into every conversation. This focused practice with one phrase at a time helps you develop natural speech patterns gradually and authentically. Once this phrase starts feeling completely natural and automatic, you can choose another one to work on. Over time, you'll build up a collection of natural, connecting phrases that make your English sound more conversational and flowing. The third action is to identify one daily situation where you can practice natural English conversation and commit to making these interactions more engaging and friendly. This might be ordering coffee, chatting with a cashier, talking to people in your building, or making small talk with colleagues. Choose a situation where you already use English regularly, but where you tend to keep interactions brief and formal. Your goal is to make these conversations slightly longer and more natural by adding friendly comments, asking simple questions, or sharing brief personal information. For instance, if you usually just say, "medium coffee, please," when ordering at a coffee shop, try saying something like, "Hi, could I get a medium coffee, please? How's your day going so far?" If the cashier at the grocery store asks how you are, instead of just saying, "Fine, thank you," try responding with, "Pretty good, thanks. Busy day, but I'm getting things done. How about you?" These small additions transform routine transactions into brief but genuine human connections. They give you practice with natural conversation while building your confidence in comfortable, low-pressure situations. Most importantly, these positive interactions will make you feel good about using English, which motivates you to continue practicing and improving. Here's what I want you to understand about these three actions. They work because they focus on natural communication rather than language performance. When you practice talking to your mirror, you're developing spontaneous expression skills. When you focus on using one connecting phrase naturally, you're building authentic conversational patterns. When you make daily interactions more friendly and engaging, you're practicing real human connection through English. The beautiful thing about these actions is that they build on each other. The confidence you develop through mirror practice makes it easier to use connecting phrases naturally in real conversations. The natural speech patterns you develop through connecting phrases make your daily interactions more engaging. The positive experiences from friendly daily conversations motivate you to continue practicing and improving. I want to remind you of something crucial as you begin implementing these actions. Natural English speaking is absolutely achievable for you. It's not a special talent that only some people have. It's not dependent on having a perfect accent or knowing thousands of vocabulary words. Natural English speaking is simply the result of focusing on communication and connection rather than perfection and performance. Every single person who speaks English naturally today, including native speakers, developed these abilities through practice and experience. The difference is that they focused on expressing themselves authentically rather than trying to sound like someone else. They celebrated their successful communications rather than obsessing over their mistakes. They practiced regularly in comfortable situations before moving on to more challenging ones. You have everything you need to develop natural English speaking skills. You have ideas worth sharing, personality worth expressing, and the ability to connect with other people. The only thing standing between you and natural English communication is the decision to focus on authentic expression rather than perfect performance. Small, consistent efforts really do lead to remarkable improvements. 5 minutes of daily mirror practice might seem insignificant, but over a month, that's more than 2 hours of spontaneous English expression practice. Using one connecting phrase naturally for a week might seem minor, but it's the foundation for developing dozens of natural speech patterns over time. Making daily interactions slightly more engaging might feel like a small change, but it transforms your relationship with English from something stressful into something enjoyable. Remember that every expert was once a beginner, and every natural English speaker was once where you are right now. The journey from where you are to where you want to be is made up of small, consistent steps like the ones I've given you today. Embrace this journey, celebrate your progress along the way, and trust that your natural English voice is already inside you, waiting to be expressed with confidence and authenticity.